Hi, this is Susan Priest, and you are probably listening to this video because you are taking one of my many philosophy classes, either Philosophy 101, Philosophy 135, Philosophy 200, Philosophy 210. The list goes on. So what I'm attempting to do here is to give you a few tips on writing thesis statements and how to get started with writing assignments. So the first topic we want to look at, which is a theme that runs throughout all of philosophy and can be a really useful idea if you can, that you can apply in other places if you just get this issue. So the first thing I want to say is that a philosophical argument always contains two parts. There is the conclusion, the point the author is trying to make. That's important, and that's actually your starting place. But an argument also has to contain at least one premise, maybe more. And these are the reason or the reasons that the author supports their conclusion. Now, I took this picture when I was on vacation. It was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So this is on the window of a door in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So what we have here is a series of bumper sticker statements, right? Now, I'm going to ask you, and you answer it in your head, do we have any philosophical arguments here? I'm already against the next war, women's rights are human rights, Black Lives Matter, climate change is real, love is love, water is life, resistance is fertile. That's kind of funny. Did you answer in your head? Okay, I hope that you notice that all of these are conclusions. We might have an idea that there's some implied premises, but actually we don't know until we have a conversation or see what the author says. So notice that images can make an argument, and oftentimes what we see out in the world are incomplete arguments, where we think we know what the person is thinking, but we make some assumptions. Okay, here's another meme. So the example is, this is something, when I did this, I did a search of images that came up with love is love I didn't write love is love as a conclusion, I just wrote love is love. So here's something that says, as long as you are happy, does it matter who you fall in love with? So you might ask yourself, what are the premises that support this conclusion? So this is placing that we know that the person who is writing this or creating this meme has some affinity to gay pride because of the rainbow and the color of love, but it's not really stated here. So we have to look at, if you were going to say love is the conclusion, well, part of the problem with that is that it's a little mysterious. It could mean a lot of things. So think about, what are the ideas that support this conclusion, right? Maybe one of the premises is that we know that there's a lot of biological determination in how people view their sexual identity and their sexual preferences. A lot of it comes from nature. So that could be a premise that supports this conclusion. There might be some other premises that you could think of, but when you look at what the meme is saying, you might see that happiness is the implied reason why one should support the idea that love is love. Because happiness is, your personal happiness is more important than making someone feel like you're doing the right thing. We might say that. Okay. Very interesting. When I did this search, I came up with this second meme, which is a little obscure. So here's the meme. Love is not if or because. Love is anyway, and even though, and in spite of. So what is this author saying? What is this author saying? Is it that love happens even though something is not good, or in spite of something not being good, or in spite of something being good? Love just exists. So part of the problem here is that without knowing more about the context of this meme, we don't really know what the conclusion of the argument is. Now, here's another piece of information. I did a search for love is love memes, and this came up as a description of the love of God. Okay? So now that you have that information, can you see there's a little bit more to this? This isn't talking about love between people. It's talking about love from God. So that is a completely different argument, right? So you have to be really clear on the context of something when you're making an argument. So you might ask yourself, are there any unstated premises? Sometimes an argument has a stated premise, sometimes they have unstated premises. So these are things that are obvious or just assumed. Okay, so I picked a selection that's in one of Stephen Kahn's readers on ethics. This happens to be from his Exploring Philosophy 6th edition, but there's different versions of this in pretty much every textbook that he edits from Oxford University Press. And it comes from the defense of Socrates. Now, I want you to notice here in the quote, defense is spelled with a C and I spelled it with an S. So because this comes from Oxford University Press, you have the British spelling of defense, which is D-E-F-E-N-C-E. Okay, so just notice that difference. It wasn't a typo. Okay, so I'll read the quote. Very well then, I must defend myself, fellow Athenians, and in so short a time must try to dispel the slander which you have had so long to absorb. That is the outcome I would wish for, and I would like to succeed in my defense. There's some more. I edited out. That's the ... And then, but let that turn out as God wills. I have to obey the law and present my defense. Now, it is not easy to figure out what the character of Socrates is saying. So, just a reminder, this is actually Socrates is Plato's mouthpiece. So Socrates is expressing Plato's ideas. I think sometimes students forget this, and I get papers about what Socrates thinks. We don't know what Socrates thinks. We know what Plato thinks, okay? But it's pretty clear throughout this whole section that the most important thing that the character of Socrates is arguing is that he must defend himself. So the conclusion is that he must defend himself. The premise is the reason why. He wants to dispel slander. Actually, the closer you read, you go, well, is Socrates trying to get his charges reversed? Is he trying to get free? Is he trying to avoid the death sentence? Why is he defending himself? Well, he's actually defending himself to dispel slander. So in just an easy sense, I want to show you how I plucked out the main idea of the text, which is Plato's main argument that Socrates must defend himself to dispel slander. And the first part is the conclusion, and the second part is the premise. Could be the opposite. Okay, we're going to look at another example. This one is from a Hindu reading from the Katha Upanishads. For those of you who are taking a world religion course with me, you will find this in the Philip Novak reader on page 13. So there is in the Upanishads, which are there's lots of Upanishads, and they're collections of conversations. So it's actually very similar to Plato. So there's another reason for choosing this. The author is the character Nachi. We don't know who the author is, first of all, but the character there's two people having a conversation. Nachiketus, who is a holy man who is trying to figure things out, and Death. So Death is a character in here. So we don't really know from this text who is the speaker, but it's one of those two. We could say, I bet it's Death. All right. So here's the quote. Awake, arise, strive for the highest, and be in the light. Sages say the path is narrow and difficult to tread, narrow as the edge of a razor. The Atman is beyond sound and form, without touch and taste and perfume. It is eternal, unchangeable, without beginning or end, indeed above reasoning. When consciousness of the Atman manifests itself, man becomes free from the jaws of death. Okay, so man in this context is used in a universal sense. This is a over 2,000-year-old document, so remember that. Keep that in context. Okay, so this is a little bit more mysterious than the conversation between Socrates and his accusers. But this is what we can see is the author, whoever that author is trying to make an argument on how a person should approach death and the holy life. So there's something about being a religious person, and this, you'll see this is true in many different venues, that the religious life is trying to get humanity to look at how they should think about or approach their own mortality. Now, in this section, which we can see from, I'll go back and forth, the word Atman is the one that we need to understand. Now, you don't understand that right now, but you will later. So we know that the key to understanding this section is this word Atman. That's a Sanskrit word. So don't feel weird if you don't know what it means right now. So if I dig a little deeper, I might say that one way you could look at this, it's not the only way, but one way you could look at this selection of text is that the conclusion of the argument is that a person can become liberated from death. So, and it is difficult, but possible. And then I might add, it's difficult, but it's possible. And it involves understanding the consciousness of the Atman, right? So the last line here is key in this text. Okay. Now, if you were choosing that, you'd probably have to spend a little bit more time reading and thinking about it. And that's why I want to remind you that the first thing that you need to do when you're getting started with writing a philosophy paper is you need to pick a specific text. It doesn't have to be long. You don't have to focus on everything. I want you to see that just focusing on one paragraph might give you enough meat. for a 750 to 1,000 word essay. So the first thing you want to do is brainstorm or do a free write about your ideas on the topic. I always think it's really helpful to set a timer just for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and write. So try that out. So here are some prompts to help you get started. So first off, it's really important for you to identify what do you think about either of the sample texts, or when you're choosing a text for your paper or a series of ideas that are asked of you in the paper. What do you really think about this? You got to talk about that. Second question, which is a prompt for brainstorming or free writing, is what ideas does this text relate to in the world? So we can see actually in the Socrates, there's a lot about what is justice, the concept of prison, both literal and metaphorical, freedom. Both texts talk about how to approach death. Very interesting. Third prompt, does the text remind you of any situation in your life or experiences of friends or family members? So anytime that these big ideas get thrown about, I know you have an opinion. Maybe it doesn't have to be super judgy or super hostile or argumentative in the sense of really passionate. It could just be, what do you really think about these ideas being discussed? And finally, I want you to be thinking about, what do you want to communicate in this paper? Because writing is simply a communication tool. And almost everything out there in the world is somebody creating an argument. And a lot of times people are creating bad arguments or not well-informed arguments. So here's a way for you to practice really thinking about what you think and why it's important. Okay, so now to the nitty-gritty of creating and developing thesis statements. So all of you have an opportunity to submit thesis statements ahead of time for points. Take advantage of these small point exercises. So first, you need to pick a topic that's meaningful to you. And then you need to do a free write. And then step 2 after the free write is really to write some sample conclusions that you might have that relate to the topic and the text. So think back to the conclusion again is, what is your bottom line? What are you really trying to say? That's the conclusion of the argument. And then I want you to write what supports your conclusion from the text and from your observations of the world. So as you're writing a philosophy paper, you want to use both examples from the text, always, 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 but you also want to use examples from your lived experiences. And it's totally fine to use the first person. I know this is shocking, but in philosophy, it's actually standard. So as you're submitting, you're going to be writing a sample thesis statement that links your premises and conclusion. That's really key. And you want to label, because I might not know I want you to label it. What's your conclusion and what is your premise or your premises? And then finally, I want you to write a few more sentences so that you can articulate why you think this is a relevant thesis. Because sometimes people have a thesis statement that is not very interesting or what we might call not very relevant. So don't overthink this. Just write some more. That way I can give you plenty of feedback before your paper is due on your thesis statement, and I can help you avoid some pitfalls. Okay. This you can ignore this if you want, but I just want to let you know that the old-fashioned 5-paragraph essay is actually kind of beautiful, because it says that you are in your introduction, getting the reader excited, outlining the scope of the paper, and really honing in on the thesis of your paper. And then you have the body is 3 organized paragraphs that explore the thesis, giving supporting details and transitioning from each paragraph to each paragraph. And then finally, at the end, you're restating the thesis in a new way and summarizing the ideas that you have. So you don't have to use this format, but I think it's a really helpful guide. And also I want to say that, just as a reminder, that every paragraph in the essay should be building on your philosophical thesis statement. So you shouldn't lose, it shouldn't just be in the beginning and the end, it should be throughout. And I also will say that an excellent essay will consider opposing viewpoints. So last couple words, you want to avoid plagiarism. I hate failing people for this reason. Okay, so just know that. But I will if you violate these principles. So for philosophy classes, I'm asking you to use MLA Format, Modern Language Association. I think we're up to the 8th edition. I might be wrong on that, but that was the last time I looked. You want to cite after direct quotes. So if you're using a direct quote from the Novak reader, just put Novak, page 13. You also need to have an in-text citation after you have a summary of ideas. So if you're summarizing Plato's ideas, put Plato right in context there. You also want to include as your final page a works cited that lists every reference. Even if you just have one, put that in. Even if it's just the textbook, still include that. When in doubt, cite. You do not use any other person's work from any source, including websites, without attribution. So if you can see here, I have put an image of what page 1 of an MLA formatted paper looks like. Don't get this wrong. It's really easy to set it up, okay? So I don't want you to lose points for silly reasons. So look at this. You need to follow this format. And the last page, this is an example of what the works cited page should look like. Now, you're submitting these electronically, so put the works cited on its own page. Don't have it continue on, okay? So I hope you find that helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm looking forward to reading your writing this semester.